Thanks for coming, everybody. Both everybody here in person and online. Happy winter. I'm Andrew McRae. I'm an associate professor in emergency medicine and community health sciences. And I took over as the internal peer review lead at OIPH, not aspiring to ever replace Lynn McIntyre, who led the IPR program for a long time. This session is supposed to be a not at all subtle sales pitch for people to take advantage of the Institute's peer review and mentorship programs. These opportunities are intended not just to help make grant applications better and more competitive, but also to offer mentorship and coaching around research program development, career planning, and professional development. So we'll be giving a brief overview of all that, in addition to having a great discussion with our panelists who are joining us today. So I'd like to introduce Jenna Miller, who's the manager of the Office of Grant Development at CSM, who's going to talk about all the resources that her team offers, and our colleagues in community health sciences, Dr. Olstad and Karen Tang, who are going to be sharing their reflections on how to get the most out of the internal peer review process. So before we start, I want to acknowledge that we live and work on the traditional territories of the peoples of Treaty 7, including the Blackfoot Confederacy, composed of the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney First Nations. And we live and work on the home of the Métis Nation of Alberta Districts 5 and 6 as well. I'm going to start by giving a bit of a refresher on the IPR programs that the Institute offers, and the reasons why each of these are great to take advantage of at specific points in our research program development. People might be most familiar with the grant-specific IPR that we offer with each Tri-Council cycle and with other different grant opportunities. But I wanted to first put in a plug for some of the other options that we offer. Propel sessions are intended to be a sounding board for big overarching research program decisions, or research program directions and career counseling. So this covers things like which direction should I go with the research program in terms of objectives and scope and methodologies. It can also serve as a discussion for career planning in terms of meshing your research objectives with other professional aspirations that you might have, or discussions around how to get the most out of a sabbatical and that kind of thing. So these are focused on you as an individual, as opposed to as an individual or as an overall research program, rather than on a specific project. And we'll often bring in your department head for these Propel sessions to make sure that everybody's on the same page about how to best support you as a scientist and as an individual. The other programs are focused more on specific grant development. And if you're kicking around a grant idea but haven't yet started typing, I strongly encourage you to consider a chalk talk where you present your idea and propose methods. Then a small panel of people with methods expertise or content expertise offer advice on questions of scope, like should I apply for funding for both a derivation and a validation study, or one at a time, for example. Questions around what's the optimal CIHR review panel that's most likely to be sympathetic to your project, and that kind of thing. These should ideally be done about 6 months before a CIHR deadline, or even earlier, to give you time on focusing on writing afterwards. And they're often really helpful for early career researchers. We offer them formally through the RISE program for ECRs and the CSM. But it's not just for early career researchers, and it's really something that you should consider taking advantage of at any point in your career. Next are grant-specific IPR programs that are individual reviews by 2 or 3 reviewers who have relevant review expertise and provide feedback on either in writing or in person. And if you register early enough for it, we can even arrange a mock grant review panel. One carrot for taking advantage of any of these programs is that if your grant scores well, but just below the funding threshold, there are some Institute bridge funds available that you can apply for, provided that your project's aligned with the Institute's objectives and pillars. But you have to take part in the internal peer review process for them to be eligible. So that's one carrot that we have for you. When I first took over this role in the fall, I was initially probably more surprised than I should have been at what a massive undertaking it is to provide internal peer review at each tri-council cycle. So each cycle we collect results or collate results from all of our OIPH applicants. We review their scores in detail. We review reviewer comments in detail. And provide tailored advice to applicants who weren't successful. Last year, across grant opportunities, we then provided internal peer review for 45 applications. Each application got at least 2 reviews from a total of 79 different peer reviewers from across the Institute. And we think it's worthwhile. There's a couple of graphs I want to show you here. These are comparing O'Brien grant success rate, tri-council grant success rates compared to the rest of CSM as well as national averages. You can see that CSM and national averages, the orange and yellow lines track pretty well. But what I want to draw people's attention to and compare things to are these 2 red lines here. These are the success rates for all O'Brien members and O'Brien members who underwent the internal peer review process. What you can see is that the highs are more sustained in terms of a higher success rate, and the lows are lower. And so, in years where we don't do well as an institute, those who did take part in the internal peer review process tended to do better. And the higher success rate for people that did take advantage of internal peer review seems to be more sustained over time. And so, there may be a bit of ecological fallacy in drawing conclusions here, and we haven't done any formal statistical testing, but we're pretty convinced that IPR is a useful exercise, especially when we review the CIHR reviewer comments and see how well the CIHR comments actually map onto what our internal peer reviewers said before the application. And what we see is that if you've addressed comments that were raised in IPR, those tended to get reflected back on CIHR review comments as strengths rather than weaknesses. So we think IPR is a very worthwhile exercise. So that's my pitch. The OIPH team is here to help you. We think it's well worth your time to take advantage of these resources. And next, I'm going to pass the mic to Jenna to invite her to talk about how the Grant Development Office can help set you up for success.
Sure. Go to the next slide. Yeah. So this is the team that I have the absolute pleasure of working with, and Clint and Brandy are back there in the back. So we have Clint, Brandy, Priya, and Mohit, who support faculty-led external research grants and in different portfolios and areas. We have Lori, who keeps us all in line. Anytime you email medgrant@ucalgary.ca, it's Lori who's going to be there to help answer your questions and help you navigate the systems and the processes. And then on the far right is the side of the office that takes most everything that we do for our faculty members and also provides it for postdocs. So currently that's Vienna, who's supporting our postdocs, but we are just in the process right now, going to be onboarding in the next few weeks, a new person to help Vienna with some of that work, as well as that's been a quickly expanding area for our office. So that's the team in short. What are some of the things that we can do for you? Can you go to the next? So just a really quick list of some of the things. So some of the resources we have available, we have the budget calculator. Many of you use that. It helps you understand what different things are going to cost, how to put them in different budget categories, whether that's for tri-agencies or others. We have a guide for EDI and sex and gender-based considerations. We have some other resources to actually help you build an EDI plan, but that guide really gives you the basis of information of the things you should be considering. We have a document on the research support environment. So if you're writing about those things in your grants and you're struggling to have statistics and information, whether that's on O'Brien or another support service across the university, even some outside of the University of Calgary, you can go to that document and grab quick and easy information. We have a library of successful applications, always plugging this library. We're up to 360 applications, something like that now. And I know Clint's working hard to add some others. We're trying to really expand things outside of the tri-agency. So we have like 200 of those applications or CHR project grants, but we want to make sure that we're also having a good selection of other funding agencies folks can look at. A plug for the project management toolkit. We have a session coming up next Monday that the office is doing all about project management, how to use the toolkit for success, but also how you can obtain a PMP designation through the University of Calgary, if that's something you're interested in doing. We have lots of guides for applying, certainly for the CHR project grant, lots of other competitions. We have reviewer lists, KT resources. The one I want to highlight, and I'll talk about more in a couple slides here, is the IPR resources, these planners that we have. So I'll talk more about them in a second. And then we have a couple of funding programs that we run through our office as well. Next slide. Highlight our webinar series. So this is just a few of the webinars that we've run. So starting in May of 2020, we started running these webinars really focused around early career researchers, but obviously they're applicable to anyone, anywhere in their career stage. So these are just some examples of them. They're all available on our website and they all saved there. They're indexed, so you don't have to watch the whole video. You can jump to specific sections that are of interest to you. And then we also have developed some quick start guides, we call them, or one-pagers around some of the content from these different webinars. Next slide. This is the planner. So I put the link there. There's two. One that is focused for new grants, so first time submitting, and then one looking at resubmission. So you can see here, this is just a screenshot of the first section of the first page of the milestone, when you should be looking at doing that before the internal deadline, and then details and considerations. This one for new grants. So the types of questions you're asking yourself. So this can help you when you're working with your institute to set up your internal peer review, but maybe your institute is not supporting formal IPR for a specific competition. You're looking at doing IPR yourself. You know it's a good idea, but you're like very overwhelmed about how to go about doing this. Who should you ask to review your grants? That's what these considerations are for. And they're really how our office works. Our office does a lot of setting up of IPR committees as well for different competitions. And these are the types of things that help guide us when we're doing that work. Stay tuned. We are going to be doing a lot more around IPR in the new year. I've been meeting with the review leads from the institutes. They've been asking me for some stuff our office can do. So hopefully starting in sort of January, you'll be seeing some new stuff from our office around IPR, but these are available now. You can grab them off our website and start using them. Hopefully. That's it. Anyway.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So the questions around when should you be starting to think about doing IPR, especially if you're looking at the spring 2025 CIHR cycle, the answer is today. Or yesterday. So I know it's tough to think about. I need to start thinking about internal peer review when I'm not even going to get, if you're thinking about a resubmission, when you're not going to be getting your notice of recommendation until the middle of January. And it takes a while after you've submitted a grant to say, I don't really want to think about this grant again for a while, and just kind of decompress a little bit after submitting. But knowing what success rates are, and especially if it's a first time submission or second time submission, it's probably worth thinking about, okay, what's it going to take to get this from the 70th percentile up into the 95th percentile, where you can really be more confident about funding. And that's what's starting to talk early with the internal peer review team is all about. So organizing something like a chalk talk or a bit of a debrief, personalized debrief of your reviewer comments from last time to say, okay, I've addressed this, this, and this. Here's my response to reviews. But what do you think some vulnerabilities might be that I could address for next time? And so starting to think today about the spring resubmission or the spring submission deadline. If you have an application in this fall, starting to think about your resubmission today is a good idea. And if you know that you're going to be submitting a new grant in March, then really starting to set up a chalk talk now to really get the scope of it nailed down. One of the common themes when we looked at the review comments from last cycle was that an application is only as strong as its third objective. And so what we recommended to a lot of people this time around is to actually pare grants down and make them smaller. And that, you know, do one or two objectives and do them really, really well. Turn that up. Sorry. And so starting to think early about getting all your ducks in a row for the March 5th deadline, and the deadline for internal review is going to be earlier. But there are a few changes to how CIHR is going to be reporting results that people should probably be aware of as well. Thanks to Brandy for sending this along. Rather than getting your rank within the committee, you're going to be getting the range of applications that you scored. So are you in the bottom 25%? Are you in the 25 to 50th percentile, 50th to 75, 75 to 90, or in the top 10%? And that's all the information you get.
At the notice of recommendation,
The recommendation.
at the NOR stage, yeah.
Yeah.
So where you'll have to be making that decision.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do I likely need to be submitted?
Yeah, and which is probably still enough information to go on. But it's just going to be something a little bit different for people who've been on the hamster wheel a few times. The notice of recommendation is just a little bit different, but materially doesn't change much. The sooner you can get the ball rolling for either a new application or the application, the better off you're going to be. So I think that's all the formal didactic stuff that we wanted to present. We wanted to spend most of the time in a panel discussion and sharing the experience and expertise of the people we have up in the front of the room. And so we developed a few questions to guide the discussion, but this isn't going to be we will probably cover these in some sort of organic fashion. But maybe I'll just start the discussion by asking Jenna, since she's right next to me. What do you think, having been both a recipient of peer review as well as someone who's done a lot of peer reviews, what do you think were the most helpful things when you were on the receiving end of the peer feedback?
Yeah, so I would say basically I think of IPR, it's kind of like a mock committee meeting in CIHR. You know, you kind of get that high level perspective from people who are not experts in your area. And then you can find out, well, what are the things that they don't understand? Because if they don't understand them, the committee is probably not going to understand them either. And just understanding like how these non-experts may interpret the grant, any flaws that they see, because they're coming from another disciplinary perspective that is going to pick up on flaws that I don't see because I'm coming from my nutrition lens, for example. And I actually often find that the IPR reviews are many times more helpful than the reviews from my co-investigators because they are more like me, tied to my disciplinary perspective. So I guess I just view it as the more eyes on my grant, the better, you know, and you can see what people understand and don't understand. And also I would encourage people, like some of the best reviews, actually pretty much always the best reviews are from the OADR. Brandy catches so much. Like I can't even tell you. I have this one grant. I finally got it on the 4th time and I sent it to Brandy each time and she read it and she found something every time. And I was like, boy, like everybody else missed that. So I don't want to create more work for Brandy, but she catches a lot. Yeah. And for other grants as well, like it used to be Jenna finding those mistakes and Clint has found many mistakes on my other grants. I just don't have as many that go through him. So, yeah.
Yeah, he'll find mistakes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think a very similar approach to Dana. I think more eyes are better because everybody kind of like sometimes you'll get a lot of similar comments, but a lot of times people bring up things that I hadn't even thought about. And I find that, you know, like I often apply with a big team of co-investigators and, you know, and so that means that at the end of the day, I might have 15 pieces of, you know, documents with revisions and comments and that to kind of wade through. But I have found that the IPR has brought up higher level questions that usually go, I don't know if it's undetected or just not prioritized as much, because co-investigators or the team has talked about this grant kind of beginning, middle, and end. They've seen sessions that are already. So I find the fresh eyes really helpful. So as an example, I had a grant where the idea was a little unconventional, where it was really to try to create a construct of something. Jamie's nodding because honestly, this grant went in like 4 different times and nobody understood it. And some people loved it and some people hated it. And most people were just like, ah, it's okay. And so, you know, I don't know, Jamie, like I probably had like 15 different people read it outside of the application team. And on before the last resubmission, I had somebody who provided really, really great advice, which was just like, my question to them was, the comments aren't bad and I can address all of them pretty easily, but why am I ranked so low? So if I address all these comments, there's no way I can go from, you know, a 50th percentile to what I need to get funded. So what is wrong with this grant? And they read it and I met with them and essentially they were like, you don't believe in the grant. That's the problem. Like, you don't believe in the project and you don't believe in the grant, and so you're not selling it well. And I've heard kind of that sort of message before where like, oh, I had to make the introduction more compelling, or I had to make this like just a different way. Like I've heard some sort of like pieces of that message before, but not in this way. And the recommendation from that meeting was you need to go home and write in a journal why you believe in this grant. And do you believe in this grant? And even if you don't believe in the intervention, do you believe in the grant? Like even if you don't believe in the intervention you're looking at, or the construct you're looking at, do you believe in studying it and why? And I rewrote the introduction actually. So this is like 4 times in and I rewrote the introduction and addressed all the minor comments, but it's stuff like that where, and that isn't the only time that something like that has happened, where, you know, people who are just really like not tied at all to the idea, was never even heard of the idea. Yeah, they can, you know, it provides me an understanding of what doesn't make sense, but it also just tells me how strong or compelling the story is. And I think somebody who's in it can't really tell me that with quite as much certainty.
One of the most common things that we get, sometimes we'll ask, you know, have you done IPR yet? Well, you know, I've got a big team and they've all read it. The problem with that, I think, is, yeah, when you're so close to the project, you don't see the same gaps that when you're coming at it the first time. And you all are on board with it. Everybody's signed up to do this. So you're all like, yeah, this is important. We're going to do this together. Woohoo. Somebody outside is like, why should I care about this? Where's that excitement? Where's that commitment to doing it? So I think that's, yeah, it's absolutely why it comes back to having outside fresh eyes. Give it yourself, like you've read something so many times, you ever put it away and then come back and read it like a couple of days later and you're like, wow, I did horrible writer. This is like, look at all the things that's the same idea, is that you're coming back with it, you know, fresh eyes and you're seeing something different.
I was initially surprised the first time that I registered for IPR for one of my first grants. So, why did Lynn choose these reviewers? Why did Jamie suggest these reviewers? Because they're not necessarily content experts. And people who are your co-investigators or people who are content experts are not going to be the people who are reviewing the grant in the committee. Because if they know you, or if they know your work, or they know people who do the kind of work, they're probably going to be in conflict with the exclusion for reviewing at the time of the panel review. So really, you're going to be getting reviewed by people who might have methodological expertise, but not have content expertise. And so I think that's really the value of the way that we do IPR here, of getting people who don't have any vested interest in your particular topic area to do the internal peer reviews, because you really have to be able to sell it to them in the same way that you need to sell it to a peer review. It's a chart. Okay. So lots of common common reflections on what we get out of the IPR process. Was there anything specific that you asked your reviewers when you submitted? I think probably one of the things that we should talk about is as someone who's undergoing IPR, how do we get the most out of the process?
Clear expectations need to be set. So I mentioned this when we were talking about doing this panel, we did a survey last year, I think, out of our office. And it was one of the big pieces of feedback that we got from people is really expectation setting between the applicant and the reviewer. Why, as an applicant, are you asking them to review the grant? When our office, you know, Clint's setting up IPR for Prius, he's asking people to sit on the panel. Sometimes they're like, previously, why are you asking me to do this? Like, I don't have that kind of expertise. And this is what we're looking for from you. This is the expertise we're asking you to bring to bear to this application. And they're like, okay, I'm going to look at it with that lens because that's the expertise we're asking for here. What kind of review? Are you still at the stage where you're like asking for big picture sort of pieces of feedback? Or are you kind of getting down to the nitty gritty where you're asking for more of that like sort of grantsmanship and, you know, things that you can move around, but you're not asking for like big changes to the project? It's really important to set that expectation because if you're like big picturing it still right now and you're like, yeah, I know it's kind of a bit of a mess in terms of structure and stuff. And then the reviewer goes through and they spend hours of time going through that line by line, and then they give you the feedback. You're dissatisfied. You're like, what was the point of IPR? But that reviewer has just essentially wasted their time as well, because you're going back in and you're moving pieces around. So really being clear about what you're asking, what lens, what piece of expertise, this is really what I need from you, the gap I see, and then what kind of level almost of review that you're looking for, I think is really, really important to do upfront, and being clear about when you're wanting to submit. It's easy for CHR project grant, you know, everybody kind of has a sense of when the deadlines are. But if you're needing to submit this 2 weeks before that deadline, or you're wanting to, you know, meet some particular timeline, being clear with reviewers when you would need that feedback back from them, being respectful of their time and it takes to do this, is really important. There's one more I was going to say, but that was like, clearly that was probably the most important one. I'll come back to me. Go ahead.
It's interesting, like about asking about like exactly what it is. I almost always, maybe because I've just done, I almost always submit my IPR request really late. Sorry, Jenny. Which I guess almost always means I get a more like, which means that the product I send out is a fairly close to final product. And I've gotten both very detailed review, but also comments that are, so I don't really know what high level means, but like where it's like, this part doesn't really make sense, or this is just a bit much for what you're trying to do. So higher level in that they're not copy editing type of revisions, but not like a complete rehaul of the entire project. So I've had, you know, and so I haven't gone in and partially probably because I don't quite know. I want all kind of feedback, to be honest, like, you know, if you have higher level feedback, I don't want to limit you from not giving me that because I want to be able to incorporate it. So I haven't really done that.
But maybe that's okay. Maybe that is the expectation, right? Like whatever I'm getting from you, I appreciate, and it can be that. I think it's when people are looking for like a specific piece, like this is where I feel weakest, or this is where I'm at right now. It's just being clear about that. So reviewers aren't spending time everywhere but there.
But what I do usually do, like I haven't asked for kind of high, mid, or like detailed feedback, but what I usually do is I pose questions I don't quite know how to answer, or where there's, you know, some discrepancy across the team about how to do something or how to respond to a certain comment, or there isn't a certain kind of expertise on the team for a small part of it. So I'll be like, you know, could you look at, you know, we've had multiple people look at this case study methodology, but you've done these a couple of times. And while they've looked at it, I'm hoping that you can also take a look at specifically objective 2 or whatever it is. And so I'll usually, or it'll be a question like on this, you know, on this recent, like on the previous comments of the scientific officer notes, it talked about this and the recommendation was that, but they didn't really comment more on it. And I'm not quite sure what they mean. So I think I've done it, but I'm not sure. Could you comment about that? So usually it's about posing questions that I'm still unsure. Yeah, just what I usually answer for.
Yeah, and I've never ask for specific feedback on anything, I just send the grant and say, please read as much as you can. But in terms of getting the most out of the process, I would say that then when the comments come back, it's easy to dismiss some of them and just say, oh, they just didn't understand that part. But that's the whole point, right? And so that means you're obviously not making the point that you wanted. So you need to rewrite it or move it or something. And then the other thing is I use IPR also for resubmissions. I know some people feel like they don't need it on resubmissions, but I still think it's just as important then. And I've also used the external, so the OADR will offer, I think it's $250 for an external review. And that, I used it twice. The one time the person didn't want the money, but one time, the external reviewer, she understood the reviewer comments that myself and everybody on the team actually, we didn't see what they meant, but she got it. And so then I was able to rewrite the introduction accordingly to address that comment. And so that was actually getting a disciplinary perspective, but it was her new eyes on the grant that she actually saw what we couldn't. So that's a helpful resource as well.
Filling us in about what's involved with getting an external peer reviewer and when's the right time to do it.
To fill you in on which way to go. Ideally, you've taken part in an internal peer review first. We want to make sure that grants are in fairly good shape. But then you can literally send me an email and say, I'd like to do this. This is the individual. Here's their email address. And I'll take it from there and provide them with $250 honorarium to do the grant. So we only get probably 3 or 4 people, maybe a year, who take us up on that. Break the bank, ask me. It doesn't hurt to ask. I'd love to provide more of that. I think we're looking at some of these funding mechanisms right now, so also a little bit stay tuned. But one of the things we'd like to also explore is for folks that are in a fairly niche area and you're just not able to really access resources internally to the University of Calgary. And I can't really do IPR well because there's not somebody here that can really help me. We'd also be interested in helping. So even if you haven't maybe done IPR, but you're kind of in that position, just reach out to me. Happy to have that conversation and we can find a way to support you getting an external review or 2.
Do we also have permission first? Like, have you kind of sort of set that up before?
Yes, I would kind of usually expect that you've had a conversation with that individual. Sometimes I've had people be like, I'd like to find somebody. Can you help me find someone? So we've done that a little bit, but I would sort of expect you probably know best who you want to ask. Sometimes I've sent people like, Brandy puts together a beautiful list of everyone who sat on the committees for the project grant, and we'll look at that and say like who might be a good person for you to reach out to, and I'll help facilitate that. But kind of incumbent upon you as a PI to have that conversation. I usually ask for you to send me the feedback that you get afterwards, just for our records. And frankly, I like to look at it sometimes and just read through what you got for feedback, so we have a good sense of what happened. Pretty easy to do.
I wanted to pick up on something Karen said about usually submitting IPR requests late. And I do the same. I submit them probably later than ideal, because you want to have what you're going to be sending in good enough shape. And although we keep saying the sooner the better, the sooner the better, the better. And so I wonder if there a one size fits all solution in terms of best time to submit, or is there a grant specific best time to submit, or is there an individual researcher best time to register for IPR? People probably feel differently, maybe whether it's a resubmission or a new submission, or if a grant is at a particular stage. Have there been variations in terms of when you registered for IPR, either early or late, and what's felt like the right time for you to get those?
I've always registered late, so I can't answer from that perspective, but I have been on the recipient end of people sending it really early and people sending it really late. And it's interesting to me because I know that the idea is to get it in and out as early as possible. But I actually found it harder to give feedback because I didn't know how final it was. The pieces didn't look quite as ready, but I didn't know how much of that was going to be cleaned up and therefore how much time to spend on that. You know, I wanted to, it was helpful in one way where I felt like the third objective had to go. And so that, you know, that allows time for somebody to act on that, but it was hard actually to do that review because I didn't quite know what kind of feedback they were wanting, because somebody who submits really early could be somebody who's also done it for 6 months and it's a really final product, or it could be somebody who's still kind of early-ish on in that grant.
Can I just offer a clarification? There's a total difference between when you register for IPR and when you then send your grants to people. It does take a little bit of time to do all the indication to get at least 2 people to say yes, so you can register early and not send out your grant for as long as
And
you
I
want.
love that. I want to say that like, same thing, right? We're like, do it now. You know, we're talking about like, you know, maybe I'm gonna have to resubmit. Like worst case scenario, you get to send an email to the 2 reviewers and be like, you just got an hour back of your life. We don't need to do this because I got funded. Woohoo! Everybody's excited, but it saves that in your calendar. And as academics and people in this field, we tend to work towards a deadline. If you've got that there, like there's going to be a meeting or whatever that looks like, you're then working towards that instead of the March 4th deadline, right? And it's just saved and reviewers can know it's coming around this time. I can save time around here. So registering versus then when you're actually sending off the application, 2 different things. Register, yeah, get it booked in people's calendars, like now. That helps everybody.
Can I add to that and say the other thing about registering early is every given, we'll call project grant cycle, there is actually a really limited pool of reviewers because it depends on who's applying. If somebody's applying for a grant, they're probably not going to agree to review. And as an institute, we refuse. We now have internal policy of we won't ask 1 reviewer to do more than 2, the exception of Andrew, because he signed up for pay. But like if Lynn McIntyre is a person you want to do a review with, the most we're going to ask her to do is 2 reviews within a single grant cycle. And if 2 other people have gotten in before you, she's off the list. Maybe not Lynn, but and very reasonably, there's a lot of reviewers who will come back and say, I'm going to do 1. And you've already asked me for this one. So I'm going to say no to this other one. So that's the other perspective in terms of like registration versus use.
Yeah, I was gonna follow up as a reviewer, like, yeah, like if I know ahead, and then there's not just like around project grants, there's all these other grant applications that like I'm in kidney, so there we have all these and. You know, I might sit as an SO on the kidney grants, right? Like, so, yeah, I need to have time and I'll just prioritize.
Most
Right,
of
right, as a
shift schedules
reviewer.
around. If you know what's coming, it's the random bits that throw us all into chaos. The other thing I was gonna say to before when I had the third and it was a brilliant thought, it was making sure reviewers, you know, are up to date on the competition and any changes that have happened. So sometimes, you know, you have reviewers who maybe themselves haven't applied for a couple of rounds, you know, no more appendices. That's pretty important. I've had people at the last cycle where we got folks that emailed us and were like, well, my IPR told me that I should just attach this. And I'm like, well, you can't. You need to make sure your IPR members have the latest and greatest information. And if it's not the CHR project grant that you're applying to, make sure they know what the review criterion are. If it's a CHR team grant or it's a kidney foundation grant or something like that, very different review criterion. Make sure reviewers understand what the limitations of that agency and that competition are and what those review criteria are. Because it can vastly change what they're gonna focus on.
And we have the reflections of timing.
Not really. I always send mine out early, but I don't have kids, so I get my grants done earlier than most people.
I think the other point around, it's being hard to know what the what they're looking for when you see a grant early on, and that speaks to the need for clear communication between the writer and the reviewer, and what kind of thing are you looking for? And then on our IPR registration tool, we ask for kind of the expertise of reviewers, but maybe something we should systematically think of doing is ask for what kind of feedback are you looking for with this review. And that would even helps us on the administration side, saying, oh, this seems like a really early phase thing. Is this better suited for a chalk talk than an IPR cycle? Or is this even too germinal for someone to think about going in for the next competition?
I know some institutes kind of track this, and I don't know if you guys do, but this person, we know this reviewer is like a really good like detail. Like they're gonna go through this with like a fine tooth comb. And then there's reviewers that are more like big picture people, so maybe that also helps you make those reviewer assignments based on what people are kind of expectations are.
Any other thoughts about what's, tips for getting the most out of peer reviews? The actual reviewing aspect when you're asked to do the term peer review.
Is the applicant, sometimes I have people in mind because they work in the same area or it's some methods I want to, or a methodological approach that I want reviewed. But sometimes I jump into them and I get assigned some, and some of the best reviews I've had are people I couldn't have expected because of, let's say, experience in CIHR, or, where the alignment isn't obviously clear. And so if I were asked to kind of like, what kind of feedback and who do you want? I'm not sure to be able to answer that because based on my previous experiences, some of really the most valuable have been people I might not have expected or even known to ask.
I'll say, surprise me.
Willing to let Jamie.
Yeah, or which panel do you think you're gonna be submitting to, because that gives.
That's huge. Committee is so important. We beat this to death. Probably in our office is the importance of having reviewers that are familiar with your work, because the types, I've been saying this for years, and every committee is like a high school clique. Like they, they have just like norms of things that they like in different committees, things that they hate, things they're gonna fund, things they're not gonna fund, even budget levels. I mean, you'll see this with Brandy can do this for folks. Like if you wanna look at what's being funded from specific committees, she can pull a list of everything that's kind of been funded in the last few cycles. See the amount. And you will see trends across different committees of what kinds of scale of projects that they are comfortable funding. So all of those types of things really important, and having folks that are experienced with the committee you're going to, super, super important. And that's, again, Brandy has that lovely list that she puts together, both UC folks, but also external folks as well that you can, so maybe there's nobody here that's available. They're all busy. They've already got their 2 reviews, but maybe we can help provide you with some money, and you can go and find somebody external.
So Leslie touched on the challenge of finding reviewers. Jamie did too. So we're always looking for more reviewers. So a question for Dana and for Karen, having done a fair number of these internal peer reviews. Other than a warm fuzzy feeling, what did you get out of it?
I find I learned a lot from reading other people's grants, and if anyone ever gets to review one of Karen's grants, I highly recommend it. I learned something from her that I used in one of my grants. She does this thing at the end where most grants kind of end on like this blah note, right? It's like KT or this is the team or whatever. But Karen adds this bit at the end where I think it's called reiteration of importance. I don't know if she has a tip, whatever grant, but and I thought, wow, that's such a good idea. Because it just kind of brings it back to the key points of the grant. And so I told you about that terrible grant I had that finally got funded the 4th time. Well, on the 4th time, I had added Karen's box. That made the difference. I don't know, but so yeah, you just learn different grantsmanship skills, I think. And also, I really like just finding out what my colleagues actually do. like, we kind of know everybody's general area, but we don't know what their specific research is about. So I really appreciate that part as well. Another thing I have gotten out is just the confidence to change committees. So that grant again went 3 times to the same committee. But after the O'Brien people reviewed it, they said, well, you should really switch committees. And actually, that was an instance where I asked them, you know, should I switch committees? And they said yes. And so that just kind of gave me the confidence to be able to do that, because I was really scared about then having to start all over with new people and then go through another 3 failures. But thankfully that worked as well. So.
I'd say much the same, like I really like free grants, because I think it's I think it's lots of new, like sometimes it's big ideas, it just prompts, you know, new questions, bigger ideas, you know. Sometimes collaboration, though, I haven't had that there happen very much where, you know, so for example, somebody who reviewed mine ended up being on one of the study teams of another grant, so that has happened. But also smaller things, like sometimes I'll look at it and be like, oh, I really like how this person added in a quote somewhere to start it off or to catch your eye. I like how this person, like what kinds of figures people present, even though it takes up a little bit of space, and how it looks. So sometimes it's formatting, sometimes it's structure, sometimes it's just, and sometimes it's introduction to something that's a new kind of method for me, or how an application of a new approach to study something. So I learned a lot. I really enjoyed it.
It's the biggest thing we push with the early career researchers. I was doing the session yesterday and they were like, what do we do right now? And I'm like, read grants, read a lot of grants, not just things that are in the library, but things that are in development. So you can also see the evolution of grants, where they start from and where they go in order to be successful. So I think the single greatest thing you can do yourself to improve your own grant writing skills is to be involved in peer review.
As a review. Yeah.
Sorry, can I just add, as a department head, I see a lot of different CVs, and I really encourage people to not only say like I contribute to IPR, but like write down the number of grants. And if you are comfortable estimating the time, put that in your CV, because like, I appreciate what you all are saying, but I also think as you're thinking about like perhaps tenure or promotion, this is a really valuable activity that you do for our community, and it shouldn't be like forfeited. So this.
Any tips for people who are first time or second time?
One thing that I really find frustrating is when people are invited to review and they lose the email. That has happened to me many times, and I just feel like it's so unfair to the applicant, because they just never reply and you're just waiting for them to reply, and because they don't reply, you don't really end up having time to replace them, and so you lose that review. And I just, like, it's very disrespectful, and I, like, as you can tell, I don't believe that you lost the email. Why? Because you don't want to do it. Right? I think it's an excuse. I'm sure it's happened, that it's true in some cases, but yeah. And then they'll reply, but it's like after the submission deadline. Oh, sorry, this email got lost. Like I've had that several times. And yeah, so don't do that to your colleagues. And just make it a priority to review. Like we'll send you, you know, please do this in 2 weeks. Well, everybody does it the day before the 2 weeks. Like, do you have to do that? Could you not prioritize this a little bit earlier so that I actually have time to use your feedback in the best way possible? Obviously, if I said 2 weeks, I said 2 weeks. So yeah, but I just think make it a priority to review if you can.
So
put yourself back in the shoes of the applicant, right? Because most people who are reviewing are also applicants, like, remember what that feels like. When you're doing that, I've had people make really weird comments when they've reviewed back to our office, like, oh, and they're like, you're commenting, I'm not doing a very good job, and I'm like, huh. Like, next time you're the applicant, we're setting up IPR, what should I just be like, nudge, nudge, don't bother, like, they don't do a very good job, you know, like, really put yourself back in those shoes of what it feels like as the applicant, what your expectations are when you're agreeing to review. This is like very stressful time for people, and everybody's crunched for time, and there's a lot riding on a grant.
So the day that Jamie emails you and you agree to do it, put the review in your calendar. Or when you hear from the person who's writing the grant, I'm gonna have this grant to you on such and such a date. Something in your calendar to review afterwards. Okay.
I would say, I think everybody has different styles, so it's hard to think about that, but I do, think that not being quick to decline because you think it's outside of your scope, I think is really important, because sometimes, a lot of times I'll read, you know, the invitation, and some of it will be something I'm familiar with, but some of it might not be. Or like the content might be something I'm familiar with, but the methods might not be, or something like that, where it's not always a perfect fit. But some of the best feedback I've had are from people where there's not a perfect fit, and I feel like I learn a lot when I provide reviews. I guess I don't know what the outcome of them, I guess I don't know what the quality of that review is, but either way, I think it's been, you know, I feel like usually when I get an invitation, there's already been kind of this thought process into who's being invited. And so, you know, just to accept that as is, and yeah, and I've been very glad to accept lots of different types of research and topics.
Big part in, you know, opportunities, our office runs a CHR mock review for faculty members. We also run one for postdocs, so there's just fun on that side, to practice these skills, how to give good feedback, what that looks like, what applications look like, so you can practice that skill. CHR has resources about, you know, peer review, how to be a good reviewer, what kinds of things to think about, avail yourself of those resources, because again, being a good reviewer is you being a good applicant. These go hand in hand, is that folks that can provide a good review tend to be pretty good themselves at writing grants. So that's a similar skill set there. So when you're expanding to one, you're expanding the other.
Since we've got a little bit less than 10 minutes left, probably worthwhile to things up to the audience, both here and online. So thanks for everybody for your participation so far, but happy to open things up to the floor.
What do you do as a reviewer if you get the grant and the person is kind of asking for the, I'm gonna submit this in 2 weeks, that kind of level, and you see it's like, ooh, there's major flaws, you need to rethink this. Do you wait in there? What do you do?
I do, which maybe is not surprising, but I always say what I think, so, but I try to do it early. Yeah, I actually just had kind of that experience this week where I felt like I found some major issues, and the person was very thankful and said they were gonna make the changes, so. But yeah, try to get it to them early.
I think if you get feedback that's like, looks good, that's
Yeah.
so like if you're like getting, and we've had people say to us like, IPR said like, looks good, and I'm like, oh, that's a bad sign. Then yeah, there's probably big things. I mean, the team, we talk about this, we get them, and we're like, hey, this is gonna need a lot of work. I think the best thing you could do for that individual is just to be as honest as you can be. Lots of people register for the CHR project grant and they're working on it and they're putting in that effort, and then they get to their IPR and folks go, this isn't ready. You need to do some big work and we'll help you. I mean, ideally, that's what your IPR says, or your institute, your department head and other folks, you know, will help you work on this, but withdraw from this round. You know, there's going to be another one in 6 months.
let's wait and have a great version to put in 6 months. And I think we want IPR to do that. If it's not ready, we want people putting their best foot forward. Committees have memories, reviewers have memories. You want to make sure you make a good, strong impression. So they might not love it in the moment when they get the email. That's like, whoa, okay, easy does it. But I think if they can stop and, take a day and think about it critically, it's meant to help. I mean, reviewers, you're not evil, bad people. Your reviewers are your peers and your colleagues, and they're doing it to help. They're coming at that from that perspective. And I think as an applicant, stop and think about it. Yeah, thank you. That is great feedback.
Are they all buried under a snowbank?
Yeah.
It's fair.
That's the case, and maybe I wanted to say thank you to everybody who served as an IPR reviewer. Thank you in advance to those who will be serving as IPR reviewers. And thanks very much to members of our panel for the discussion today.